The supply chain financing has been gaining a lot of traction. Can you please help us understand how it actually means in the Indian context, especially for MSMEs?
The creditworthiness of the MSME no longer becomes the primary important factor in determining credit.
What, according to you, are the factors that are driving the overall credit growth in MSME, and do you think are they sustainable?
The focus of government and the reforms, the formalization and digitization which is happening.
Access data which you could never even think of getting access to. The CGT MSE scheme, a game changer where making cash available to MSMEs is concerned.
Hello everyone, welcome to our YouTube channel. As we all know, MSMEs are the backbone of India's economy and often driving employment, innovation and regional development. But on the hindsight, easy, timely and affordable access to credit is still a challenge to most of these MSMEs. That's where supply chain financing steps in, which is just not a funding tool, but it is a strategic enabler that helps unlock working capital and streamlining cash flow. We'll talk about more on the synergies and how this is shaping up the overall MSME lending ecosystem in today's episode. For the same, we have our special guest today, Mr. Nirav Choksi, co-founder and CEO CredAble, a tech platform enabling working capital. It's also amazing to talk about CredAble, which is growing 500% year on year, having a wide reach of 150,000 MSME borrowers, 75 plus corporate clients, and 30 plus financial institutions associated with them. Alongside, we also have Mr. Bhushan Padkil, SVP and Head Consumer Division at TransUnion CIBIL, who brings in deep understanding and insight on the credit landscape, especially on the MSME retail side. And he will also share a unique perspective how TransUnion CIBIL has been reshaping the MSME lending ecosystem. I would like to straight dive into my first question to Mr. Choksi. Of late, the supply chain financing has been gaining a lot of traction. Can you please help us understand how it actually means in the Indian context, especially for MSMEs, and how is that different from the traditional working capital loan?
Well, I think what supply chain financing fundamentally does is it shifts the risk paradigm from the MSME to the anchor that the MSME works with. So the creditworthiness of the MSME no longer becomes the primary important factor in determining credit. But the anchor's credit history and the anchor's credit profile plays a large part in enabling working capital to happen within the MSME sector. So that's the fundamental difference. I think most traditional lending has been around collateral, has been around balance sheet, has been around financials. Now, most MSMEs, especially in tier 2, tier 3 cities, will never stack up to what a bank wants or a traditional NBFC wants. However, if you shift the focus from balance sheet-led or asset-led lending to cash flow-based lending or transaction-based trade finance, this would open up, or this is opening up massive opportunity for credit to flow into the MSME sector. So I think that's one real driving force. The other thing to understand is with your digital public infrastructure opening up, with GST becoming so prevalent, you have almost 9.8 billion invoices got uploaded onto GST last year. Now that gives you tremendous insight into transaction and trade finance and trade flows between anchors and MSMEs. And that's a great opportunity for any lender to kind of leverage versus traditionally looking at parameters that banks have created which are fairly rigid in nature. So I think that's also what's helping working capital flowing into the MSME sector through supply chain financing.
Sure, I think you've got it perfect, and thanks for sharing this new perspective on the MSME lending. Building on the same, I'd like to put across my next question to Mr. Patkil. What, according to you, are the factors that are driving the overall credit growth in MSME, and do you think are they sustainable?
So, I think first of all, Neeraj, welcome to the show and thanks for having me in this chat, Shefali. There are many factors which are driving growth of credit for MSME, and if I have to call out few which are leading, I think one of the biggest is the focus of government and the reforms which are driving this sector. Second is the formalization and digitization which is happening in the MSME sector as such. And some of this data reflects in our joint study that we conduct with CIBIL, which is very well known as MSME Pulse, and which becomes a reference point when it comes to pulse check on credit to MSMEs as such. And I would quote some of the data points from that study. And if you look at the credit to MSMEs have grown to 35 lakh crore, which is at a growth of year-on-year growth of close to 13%, which is healthy growth. Underlying delinquencies are fantastic. In fact, we are seeing lowest delinquencies for a few years now, right? So asset quality is great, and this credit growth is happening. And when I talk about some of the factors that we are looking at, one, government schemes, which I spoke about, whether it's Udyam Assist. On Udyam, we have seen tremendous acceleration. Now we have more than 6 crore MSMEs which are on Udyam portal. So Udyam Assist is great initiative. Another great initiative is Credit Guarantee Scheme, which is again a fantastic initiative which is propelling MSMEs to look at credit positively. The third is government push when it comes to GST.
Right.
Now there is a lot of data which is available in a formal way for banks to look at. All of these factors together are driving tremendous amount of growth for MSMEs. But I would say that there is still a credit gap, and there is still tremendous opportunity for platforms like CredAble, for lenders, and for all types of lenders to actually serve the needs of diverse segment within MSMEs.
Sure, I think that's a very optimistic and a very, very meaningful insight. Thanks for that, Mr. Padkil. And let's take that thought forward. And my next question to Mr. Choksi is that, you being in this new field of lending, which is supply chain financing, how do you see this evolving in tandem with the overall credit growth for MSME? And do you think this fintechs and digital platforms are playing a bigger role?
I would certainly hope so. Well, what's really happened, if you see the last decade, has been about supply chain financing between your first tier vendor and the anchor. And typically anchors would be large corporates. And you've seen government initiatives like TREDS, for example, which have done extremely well. Over 2 lakh crores have been disbursed alone on the TREDS platform. Bhushan rightly said that the credit gap still is about 400 billion in the MSME segment even today. So that's one area where I think fintechs like us, who are creating an enabling infrastructure, can play a large role. So the traditional banks and NBFCs, while they bring their balance sheets to the party, I think a lot of the digitization has been happening thanks to the innovation of fintechs. Whether it's API connectivity directly into ERP systems, whether it's creating deep tier tokenized platforms to enable supply chain financing, not just to tier 1 but tier 2, tier 3 vendors. Think about fabric processors, think about rural agri-logistics players. Now these guys get traditionally ignored because they are never tier 1 vendors to large corporates. So I think therein lies the opportunity to fill the $400 billion gap that TransUnion CIBIL has been highlighting. And again, all of this can be done through digital infrastructure, through smart credit underwriting, through using cash flows of, from large anchor customers to tier 1 and thereby to tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, thereby opening up this opportunity, right? I think just the other big problem that we see is the delayed payment scenario. Almost 10.7 lakh crores, if one of the reports said, that's almost 6% of India's GDP stuck in delayed payments to MSMEs. Now, despite government's best efforts to bring in the 45-day payment rule, etc., that's still not really changed the infrastructure. So, supply chain financing again there plays a big role in unlocking that value, thereby creating a multiplier effect, if you think about it, on the GDP of the country. So I think those will drive a lot of MSME credit going forward, versus traditional business loans, versus traditional collateral-backed loans, right? Secondly, Bhushan spoke about delinquencies. I think one in the 1 crore to 10 crore segment, delinquencies we've seen are at an all-time low, right? Sub 10 lakh segment may be higher delinquencies because, and that's the risk in the whole business, right? But if you look at micro SMEs aside, I think the entire, 4 crore odd MSMEs which fall outside the micro segment, you're talking about almost 35 lakh crore of unserved demand. So I think that's going to drive a lot of growth. Second, I think the softening of RBI rates, I think in the next 12 to 18 months, that should make it cheaper by almost 80 to 120 basis points for MSMEs to avail credit. Demand would, if you think about what happened in the last quarter, I think demand grew by 11%, but supply shrunk by 11%. So why did that happen? I think because liquidity to NBFCs continues to be a challenge, especially the smaller ones. So I think these are systemic risks and opportunities. If those get addressed, you will see a continued growth in MSME credit over the next several years.
Sure, I think that's a great perspective, and I'm sure that adds a lot of value to this conversation. Thanks for that. Building on that, I'd also like to ask my next question to Mr. Padkil. Basis on the recent trends, what are the sectors in MSME which has shown more appetite for credit, and are there any changes in the trends that you have seen recently?
We can slice and dice it many ways because there are many diverse segments on MSMEs. But broadly, if you look at, there are three segments that you look at in terms of very broad classification. And when it comes to credit, uptake, manufacturing, segment, or MSMEs who themselves manufacture or support, OEMs, that was the largest segment which typically, looks at, credit. But what we also look at is MSMEs in trade. They have started picking up, and in fact, in some of the large clusters, typically you have these large states which contribute majority of the MSME credit. We have seen the shift happening where trade credit is more than the credit which is availed by MSMEs in manufacturing per se. So definitely, that's a good sign that there are new segments emerging. What is another exciting thing is MSMEs in providing professional services. Now they are coming into a fray, and earlier this was one segment which lagged behind because of lack of formalization, because of lack of formal data. But now you have a lot of different data which are available, and obviously the push on formalization in terms of registering themselves on Udyam portal, which again drastically numbers have increased, almost 60 million or 6 crore. So those many new MSMEs are coming in, and a lot of them, professional services also are, part of it. The other, important, piece which is to look at is the cohorts which are, driving the growth. Typically, we have seen is large 5 states drive maximum MSME growth. And if I have to name it, it's usual large industrialized states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Delhi, and UP. And I spoke about one state. I think it's UP, where MSMEs into trade are driving majority of the credit demand per se. So that's a good shift that we see now. But other than that, I think all 5 states put together contribute to close to 50% of the credit demand, and all the other states manufacturing is still heavy, right? So, but it's great to see emergence of other MSME segments which are now more formal, more digitized, have more data behind them, whether it's a payment data or a digital data or alt data, basis which banks and new age fintechs are able to lend and bring them into formal lending,
Sure, I think that sounds really very progressive, and thanks for that perspective. Shifting gears a little bit, my next question to Mr. Choksi, are there enough policy support or the regulatory clarity for the supply chain financing, and do you think this will ever become mainstream for the MSMEs, or is there anything more that you think should be done to drive more adoption?
I think, look, the government has done a fantastic job in creating a regulatory framework that would enable both MSME lending, traditional and supply chain, to prosper. TREDS is one big example. We spoke about digital public infrastructure, where you are able to access data which you could never even think of getting access to earlier from an underwriting perspective. So I think that's a great step. The CGT MSE scheme
Yes.
that is a game changer, where uh, making cash available to MSMEs is concerned. That has brought in a lot of the banks and formal lenders into this segment, which wasn't really available before. But that being said, I think there are a few areas where the government could initiate a lot more push. One would be to expand the CGT MSE to cover supply chain loans. Currently, it primarily covers collateral-backed loans or covers unsecured loans, but not transaction-based lending. So that's one. The other, of course, is creating a regulatory framework to accept tokenization of tier 2 assets or tier 2 supplier receivable assets. That would further, enhance liquidity into the ecosystem. The third would be, if you look at TREDS today, they all operate in silos, right? So interoperability between the TREDS platforms or private platforms like ours would create a lot of seamless data flow amongst the platforms and help further create liquidity into the ecosystem. The fourth, I think, which is nobody really talks about, is, are we really incentivizing anchors to enable supply chain financing to happen within their ecosystems? It could be something like a small GST rebate for enabling it, or an ESG improvement in an ESG rating, for example. I think these are some things that the government can easily do to further enhance MSME credit availability. I think finally, for banks and other large lenders to enable NBFCs like us or platforms like us to further grow into this segment, I think liquidity support would be a big requirement as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a great perspective, and I think it largely is very, very encouraging for the MSMEs also to know. Moving on, my next question to Mr. Padkil. Basis the recent MSME Pulse report released by TransUnion CIBIL, the delinquencies in the MSME lending has dropped to a 5-year low, and which is a very healthy sign. Can you help us understand what are the factors enabling this credit health?
Yes, and it's such a great sign, for the whole ecosystem per se, because MSMEs, if you look at their contribution to GDP, their contribution to export, a tremendous amount of contribution, 30% to GDP, 50% to export, and we want this segment to grow. And when delinquencies are low, it gives the confidence to lenders to participate more and more, and it drives the liquidity concerns as such, and eventual growth that we expect MSMEs to have, and eventually their contribution to Viksit Bharat as such. So if you look at broadly, I would say one biggest factor is the lending to MSME per se. The banks and the lenders, traditionally, banks used to lend, but now we have a lot of fintechs also are into lending, which are MSME focused, which is amazing to see. Platforms like CredAble. So when you are, the approach to lending to MSMEs have changed a little bit. It has become more data driven. It has become more digital. The traditional practices are complemented with analytics. There is use of TransUnion CIBIL's credit information report, use of our trended algorithms, credit vision algorithms, and a score, which is credit vision commercial rank. Use of that has also increased drastically, right? All that has improved objectivity into lending, and overall, other than this credit data, there is a lot of alternate data also which is brought into when it comes to underwriting MSMEs. And a lot of data is available, per se payment data. For an example, there are a lot of platforms which are providing that data. Another data is a lot of data where transaction data with respect to e-commerce data, not only payment data but e-commerce data, GST data. All of this data is available to banks and lenders, and which is playing very important role in understanding the scale and scope of MSME, and banks are able to make more objective decisions when it comes to underwriting MSMEs as such. So that's on banks part. But MSMEs per se, even there is a lot of awareness which is coming, and MSMEs today understand what they need to do to grow. And to grow, MSMEs do understand that growth is paved through credit, because you have liquidity, you are able to grow the business, and that equation is very well understood. And it's also understood, how the importance of credit and importance of good, let's say, CIBIL commercial rank, or good commercial report. MSMEs are getting more aware. What we see is on our platform, if I have to compare, we also have now for commercial entities and MSMEs, they can pull their own commercial report. It's not only limited to lenders. And it's heartening to see that there are many MSMEs which are coming on our website and are pulling the report. And there are thousands of MSMEs who do that. What is amazing is it's self-initiated. That means they want to be proactive about their credit health, right? So that's a great sign from MSME. Second is, I spoke about different initiatives, government reforms, and different schemes. But what is also important is participation. If you see on the ground, there are a lot of businesses, MSME businesses, not only manufacturing or MSMEs which are into trade, but like I said, professional services which are now formalizing, registering themselves, filing those GSTs and creating traces for themselves, right? Which is also helping, and that awareness, the repayment discipline, awareness around that, all of that is kind of helping bringing the delinquency all-time low. I think the delinquencies are around 1.7%, which is like 5-year low, which is phenomenal. And I think all these aspects are helping bringing it down and fueling the confidence in terms of the landscape, credit landscape for MSMEs as such.
I think that's amazing, Mr. Padkil. It's a very bright and positive side. Thanks for bringing that up. Moving on, my next question to Mr. Choksi. Let's similarly on the same note, I would say. With the softening of the interest rates and the continued policy support, what's your outlook on the MSME growth in the next 12 to 18 months?
Like I said, I think we expect an 80 to 120 bip credit cost reduction for MSMEs in the next 12 to 18 months, given the progressive RBI stance on rates. The other, like we spoke about, I think the demand is extremely strong. The liquidity needs to be strengthened, but the demand will continue to grow. And there are new MSMEs coming up, being added into the ecosystem every day as we speak. From a regulatory framework perspective, I think we spoke about what steps the government can take to further enhance liquidity into the ecosystem. But I think there is a very strong foundation already. So what is really required is to see more traditional lenders come into the play. The other missed opportunity we briefly spoke about is securitization of trade receivables. We pioneered it, but if you think about it, only 5,000 crores worth of trade securitization has happened to date, versus more than 50,000 crores of consumer loans, for example. So there is a large opportunity to bring in AIFs, to bring in mutual funds, non-traditional lenders into this fold by creating tradable assets or PTCs or whatever. And platforms like us can enable that to happen. So we can create the flows, segment it, distribute it, and effectively manage cash flow risk. So I think those initiatives would also kind of help drive credit demand for MSMEs. Uh, so a combination of these factors, we believe that MSME credit is here to be strong, digital, and sustainable. So I think over the next several decades.
Thanks for your response, Mr. Choksi. I think that's another solid point encouraging the MSMEs, and that brings me to the last question of the podcast, and that's for Mr. Padkil. According to you, what are the steps that needs to be taken to ensure the credit growth for MSME stays both inclusive and sustainable?
I think I'll pick up a lot of points. I think one, obviously, the growth in terms of formalization of MSMEs. We anticipate that there are more than 70 to 80 million MSMEs in the country, but on Udyam we see near about 60 million. So there is still scope. There are new MSMEs which will continue to come in. So that's one. Second is when it comes to use of digital tools at hand, whether it's digital payments and creating digital footprint for MSMEs, so that footprint is something that can be seen by lenders. That's something which MSMEs can continue to work on. Third is we invite many MSMEs to come on our platforms, whether it's CIBIL.com, and continue to be proactive about their own credit health and their own credit report and such. That awareness will definitely help in terms of taking proactive actions, corrective actions if required, and that'll help them to set them well when it comes to taking up a credit, right? Because now many lenders are objectively looking at credit information report and commercial rank in assessing the credit to MSMEs as such. So that's another step. When it comes to government scheme, I think there is a lot that has been done, and we already spoke about some of the aspects of it, and even the policy reforms, rate cuts. I think the initiatives are there for everybody to see, and then there is a lot of participation from MSMEs which is invited, and I anticipate that will continue to happen, and that growth and growth in demand will continue to come in. But to serve that demand, I also believe that lenders and especially I spoke about fintechs coming into this MSME credit space and trying to serve needs of this diverse segment. I think there has to be more participation and more you could say personalization and customization that has to come in. On supply chain, I think you spoke a lot of different aspects, but not only that, demands around working capital. There are so many different aspects which can be customized when it comes to credit for MSMEs. So that's another. Another aspect is when it comes to inclusive growth is participation of women, and what we see is near about 25% MSMEs, and more than that, I believe, are registered under the name of women entrepreneurs, which is healthy. And this particular segment need to be addressed a little differently, right? And a lot of attention needs to be paid, on this particular segment, because this segment can drive very inclusive, very sustainable growth as well. I think a lot of these aspects, combination of this putting together, will continue to drive inclusive and sustained, growth for MSMEs, and their contribution will continue to rise for Viksit Bharat.
Thank you again for such a bright perspective. Thanks. And thanks, Mr. Choksi, for sharing your thoughts and the vision here. That brings me to the end of today's episode on podcast. Concluding and summarizing today's podcast, while challenges swinging by the MSME credit lending ecosystem, the data still tells a cautious but optimistic story. MSMEs today are borrowing more responsibly, and supply chain financing is becoming smarter and more inclusive. With continued policy support and digital innovations, I'm sure this segment will become one of the biggest and strongest enablers in the MSME growth story. Thank you all, and that was our CIBIL Sandesh.